Good morning, I'm Gustav Wolfert from the Foundation for Professional Development, and today our session focuses on the most valuable commodity in the world. This is not diamonds, it's not gold, it's not silver, but it's time. Time is the one commodity you can never ever buy, and you squander it, you're squandering part of your life. So we're going to look at time management, which is an essential tool in ensuring that your career prospers and that you are productive and effective. But it does not only influence your professional life. Good time management is of huge value to your private life as well. For me personally, I discovered time management when I was a new manager appointed into a post in the beautiful city of Geneva. I had just come out of a clinical background, which is a very reactive environment. We work in hospitals where there's endless queues of patients. So I'd never had to really plan my time. It was planned for me by other people. There were days that were scheduled that I would be doing ward rounds, I would be on intakes, or I would be working in outpatient. And I took that work habit of just dealing with things as they come up into my new position. So I got transferred from South Africa to Switzerland, and I started a new and exciting job within a public health environment. And I worked really hard. I would start in the morning early, I would leave the office at 6 o'clock, have dinner at home for an hour, and then work again till 11 o'clock at night. And about 18 months into this, my family rebelled. They said, we're in the middle of Europe, there's all these opportunities for travel, and we're not using those opportunities. All you're doing is sitting behind a desk pushing papers. And I suddenly realized that they're right. I am missing an incredible opportunity. And almost a sense of panic filled me, because where would I find time? And the obvious thing was to look at what does the management literature say? And that was when I discovered time management for the first time. Now, I'm not sure if you face the same problems in your life, but I would like you to, at this point, pause this presentation and do a small little exercise. So what I want you to do in this exercise is think about one thing that you could do, that you're not doing at the moment, but if you did it on a regular and a consistent basis, would make a positive impact on your personal life or on your professional life. Just think about that for a few moments, reflect, write it down. So what could be these examples? It could be something very simple. If you're in an academic environment, it might be if you set aside 2 hours every day to read articles, it would improve your knowledge and expertise in your subject matter. It's quite easy to come up with these suggestions. And it's quite simple, and that's again a question I pose to you. So if you know what you should be doing on a regular and a consistent way that would improve your life, why are you not doing it? And the answer, when I ask this for my students, the answer I get from everybody is, I'm too busy. I've just got so many things to do, and there's so much pressure on me that I really don't have time to stop, think, and do these activities. And that's where time management becomes the solution. So what is time management? Time management is a very simple technique that you can apply to both your public and your private life that leverages a concept called the Pareto principle. Now, the Pareto principle is something that was identified through time motion studies. In other words, where consultants follow people through their workday and measure how much time do they spend on each activity. So how much time do you spend reading your emails? How much time do you spend standing around the water cooler having a chat? And what they found is that 80% of the productive outcomes that people achieve in a day, they achieve with 20% of the time. Think that through. In other words, 80% of your daily achievements are coming from 20% of your time allocation. And time management is built around the concept of just saying, if we can replicate that efficiency that gives you that you sort of subconsciously apply to that 20% of your time, and we can just duplicate. So in other words, if 40% of your day operates at that same efficiency, your output will go up to 160%. And that's what I found. When I was sitting there in Geneva, I started applying time management principles. I was rigorous. I followed the script. And within 2 weeks, suddenly by 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, that my in-tray was empty. And I couldn't understand it. But just because previously it took me until into the night to get my work done, now was done by 3 o'clock in the afternoon. I had an extra 2 hours every day that I could allocate to stuff that wasn't being pushed at me, but I could do things that I thought was important. So that's the principle of time management. It's to apply a system that allows you to optimize your productivity so that you can increase your outcomes for the day. Now, if we look at all activities, and this little graph or table that you're seeing in front of you, you can apply it, and I would recommend that you actually sit down, reflect on your life, and see where does your daily activities fit in. Because what it does, it creates 4 quadrants. In our first quadrant are tasks that are urgent and important. Our second quadrant are tasks that are important but not urgent. Third quadrant, urgent and not important. And our fourth quadrant, things that are not important and not urgent. And I'm giving you a number of examples. And I really want you to focus on that second quadrant. In other words, the important issues, but that where there isn't a sense of urgency. These are typically the things that when you ask people why aren't they doing it, they say, I just don't have the time. In other words, it's typically an activity that you would articulate as, if I had the time, I would learn another language. If I had the time, I would learn a new skill. If I had the time, I would exercise more. Those are typically the things that fall in quadrant 2. Now, what we found is that urgency drives our activities because we have a perception that if something is urgent, we need to attend to it. The adrenaline kicks in, you're under pressure, and you motor through these activities. And what we tend to forget is some activities that are urgent are important. In other words, it's correct. You have to address to them. These are the crises, pressing problems, deadlines that can't be moved or negotiated. And it's appropriate that we focus on those activities and we apply a sense of urgency in getting the job done. However, some urgent activities are not important in the slightest. Some of the people who walk into your office are not really there for an urgent issue. They're just coming to have a chat with you. Certain number of telephone calls. We all know the frustration of dealing with a telemarketer. Certainly a lot of emails that are coming in are not important, but they are perceived as urgent. And perhaps some of the meetings that we go to are not particularly important. The last quadrant is the obvious stuff that we should avoid. The things that aren't urgent and aren't important. In other words, often the stuff coming through social media, the time wasters. But what we find is that because people are so pushed in the 2 urgent quadrants, quadrant 1 and 3, they often escape into quadrant 4. You reach that point in the day where you say, I can't cope with all of this anymore. Let me check my social media. Let me do something that's maybe irrelevant to my work activity, but it's a bit of a release valve. So, an issue that's come up more and more in the literature is the concept of urgency addiction. So, at this point, I would suggest that you go and Google urgency index or urgency addiction. You will find a questionnaire that allows you to rate yourself in terms of do you suffer, and I use the word suffer deliberately because it is like a disease, Are you suffering from urgency addiction? So pause this tape at this point and go and find this urgency addiction index, rate yourself, and come back with the understanding on whether you are an urgency addict. The word addiction is used deliberately in this context because what happens is if we are under pressure, our stress hormones kick in. And like any other drug, they create short-term positive sensations. So it overrides any pain we might have. It overrides negative emotions. If I'm a bit depressed, if I'm feeling insecure, once that adrenaline kicks in, those emotions go away. I get the feeling that I'm powerful, I'm in control, I'm handling issues. And there's an enormous feeling of achievement and security linked to that achievement. But like any drug, this is a high, and when you come off these drugs, there are serious negative consequences. If it carries on long enough, you have people who are burnt out. But it often has a detrimental effect, especially on our relationships, because if we have to steal time from somewhere to feed our urgency addiction, we normally steal it from ourselves or from our loved ones. You sacrifice the time you would spend with your partner or your children in order to address these urgent priorities that's in your inbox. And in the long term, where we decide, and this is the most important thing about time management is a conscious decision that you're going to take to start managing the most valuable commodity you've got. So if we live in quadrant 1, as I've said, you're living in stress, burnout, crisis management mode, and perpetually trying to put out fires. If you live in the second urgency quadrant, in other words, the urgent but not important things, you've got a short-term focus, you're still in crisis management because you're neglecting quadrant 1 activities, they'll catch up with you. You're going to feel out of control, and you're going to end up having shallow relationships. If you live your life in quadrant 4, in other words, the not urgent and the not important stuff, you are being totally irresponsible, right? You are spending all your time at work mucking around on social media, chatting to your friends and having a wonderful time, but it's almost inevitable that you are not getting things done and you will be out of a job and be dependent on other people for your basic survival. But if you can manage your time effectively and spend sufficient time in the important but not urgent category, remember the stuff where we said, if I had the time, I would, then you're going to have a life of vision and perspective, balance, control, and few crises, because the more time you spend on the important but not urgent, you will also be acting in a preventative way. You will be making sure you're solving the issues that so often create crises in our lives. Right, so just to recap at this point, and again to try and suggest that you go and do this at home, draw this graph, put in your daily activities across these 4 quadrants, allocate some time to it, because it's always good to know how much time am I spending in the not important and not urgent quadrant. If you escape into your social media for half an hour a day, probably no harm done. But if you're spending 4 or 5 hours a day there, think what you could do with that time if you used it wisely. So, in recap, if it's urgent and important, do it as soon as possible. Do it now if it's possible. If it's urgent and not important, see if you can delegate it or schedule time at an appropriate time to spend some time on it. Prioritize the important but not urgent time. And the most important thing is to create time blocks on a daily basis where you can focus on this quadrant. And if it's not important and not urgent, get rid of it. Dump it. Don't waste your time there. So, the tool that will allow us to more effectively spend our time and hopefully free up the time that we can spend in quadrant 2 is basic time management. And time management is about 100 years old now. It started in the Industrial Revolution, and if we think back to the period before the Industrial Revolution, when people were living in an agricultural type of environment, life and the pace of life was incredibly slow. They estimate that if you read one of the bigger Sunday newspapers cover to cover, you will have been exposed to more new information in that one day than people in the 1800s would have been exposed to in their whole life. So as the world went into the Industrial Revolution, as people started moving to the cities, going into factory jobs, the pressure started mounting. And that's where the first generation of time management came out. And it was quite simply just keeping a to-do list. In other words, making a list of things that you have to do so that you don't forget them. Second generation evolved out of this and said it's not just good enough to make a list, but you must prioritize your list. So you must decide if an activity on your list is a priority, in other words, it's important and urgent, a B priority, perhaps not that important, but still some urgency, or a C priority, something that's not urgent or important. But you can work out how to prioritize yourself. But second generation, so in other words, the person made a list of what I must do, but they started prioritizing that list. Third generation took this one step further, and this sort of happened in the more recent past, and that was the idea of taking your list that you've now prioritized and then allocating the tasks in your diary based on your individual biorhythm. So you'll again have to work this out for yourself. But some people are very productive in the early morning and then they slump after lunchtime. Other people might be much more productive in the evening or late afternoon. And again, you use your priorities. So if it's a priority activity, organize it, schedule it, put it in your diary for when your biorhythm tells you you've got lots of energy. If it is a lower priority activity, schedule it for that period after lunchtime when you've got less energy. That's a good time to get rid of administrative tasks, while creative tasks you want to do when your energy levels are high. Fourth generation time management was introduced in the early 90s by one of the major management gurus, Stephen Covey, and what he suggested is you develop once a week, you plan the week out, but you don't look at it at your diary the way we tend to look at our office hours. You actually look at it as a 24-hour time slot available 7 days a week. And what he said to people is go and identify in your life what are the different roles you've got. So, for example, your role could be as a lecturer at university, but you're also a parent. That's a very valid role. You're a partner. That's a valid role. You might have a community involvement role. So you define those 4 or 5 roles that you play in your life. And then once a week, you ask yourself the quadrant 2 question. You say to yourself, if I had the time this week, what is the one thing I could do this week that would significantly benefit each of these roles? You then, once you've identified those activities, you find a time slot in the 24 hours a day, 7 days a week time frame. And once you've allocated that task there, you have to have the self-discipline to consider that an immovable commitment. So it's going to be similar to that. You've got an invitation to go to a meeting with the president of the country or some major celebrity that you've always wanted to meet. If that appointment was made, come hell or high water, you would keep it. And you need to feel the same way about fourth generation quadrant 2 appointments. So if you schedule time for activity, keep that activity, protect it, and make sure you don't steal that time. Because that time that you are stealing is from your own development and often from your family commitments. So at this point, it might be worthwhile to just start converting this into how do we do it on a practical level. Rule number 1 is you've got to set some time aside to do your planning for the week that comes up and for the day that comes up. always worthwhile starting with a weekly approach. So pick a time slot, either on Sundays or first thing on Monday morning, and write down what are your to-dos for this week. So you do a weekly to-do list. If you're going to engage with this fourth generation time management, identify those roles and set the goals that you want to achieve for that week, and plan it out for the rest of the week. Remember, when you make the list, to prioritize the activities. Are there A activities, B activities, or C activities? And that gives us a good idea of what we need to accomplish in the week that comes up. What I also find useful is to keep the list, so when I get to the end of the week, I also schedule some time to first tick off every activity that I've completed in this week. There's a huge sense of satisfaction in seeing a list being ticked off, but it also helps you remember what activities you did not complete, because obviously you want to transfer those to your next week. Once you've got your weekly list, the important thing is then on a daily basis, every morning, schedule 10 minutes to look at your weekly list and then to decide which of these activities are you going to fit into your day. Now, a few practical things that I found helps a lot is do this before you look at your emails. The moment you switch on your emails, your priorities get influenced by other people's priorities. So first sit down, plan the day, look at where you're going to fit in. If your life is really busy with external appointments, it's a good idea to block time slots on a daily basis. So I've got from 8 o'clock to 10 o'clock in the morning are time slots that I try to block for the important but not urgent activities, because that's a time when I'm very productive. It's normally before our management meetings start, and therefore I find it a valuable time to, in the beginning of the year, I block those time slots for the whole year. Right now, again, the stuff we've said, when you look at the day's activities, prioritize it, and the same thing as at the end of the day, review your list, tick off what you've done, and reflect on what you need to do in the next day. Again, a personal preference, I learned time management within a paper environment, then I switched into a digital environment, I've moved back into a paper environment. I think it helps a huge amount to help you focus, to have to physically write down tasks onto a task list, to write down what you need to do every day. That process of writing down, ticking off, rewriting, I find it helps me refocus. While if it sits in a digital list, it's inclined to become a bit static, where one doesn't always realize how much things have changed. So what you should have picked up by now is that the way we're going to find time for quadrant 2 is by cannibalizing quadrant 3 and 4. In other words, we're going to reduce the activities and try and delegate the activities that are important but not urgent, and we're going to dump the activities that are time wasters, the not urgent, not important activities. But another very important way of freeing up time is learning to say no. I cannot overemphasize how important it is for you to start learning how to say no. Because what we see across companies, that if you are an efficient worker, if you're an efficient manager, the more efficient you become, the more people are inclined to push work at you. And we just need to, in a very polite way, say, I appreciate that you want to entrust this task with me, but look at my time management, look at my diary at the moment. I really cannot prioritize this activity. Right. As I said, block times in your diary. I block routinely from 8 to 10 in the morning and from 3 to 5 in the afternoon. The whole trick behind time management is not to overcommit or 100% commit your day, because that leaves you no maneuver space for the urgent and important things that will arise. And they will happen every day. They will come through phone calls, they will come through your email system. You need to have some time open to manage those urgent but important issues. I've talked about emails. Emails, again, I think there are some very important tips. One is try and schedule time. So what I do is towards the end of my 8 to 10 slot in the morning, I quickly check the day's emails. This allows me to identify which are urgent and important and that I need to address, but they also allow me to manage people's expectations. So in other words, if I see there's an email from somebody important, but I know I haven't got time to attend to it today and I can see it's not that urgent, I can send them back an email to say, I'll get back to you in a day or two, etc. The second block of emails that I've got is in the late afternoon. So late afternoon is I keep that open and I try to clear the day's emails at the end of the day. What's important with emails is switch off the notification sign. That little bing that keeps on coming through every time there's a new email is hugely distracting. It prevents you from focusing and it drives the sense of panic and urgency. So switch that function off. Switch it also off on your WhatsApps and your SMSs, etc. And attend to your social media type of communications on a similar way that you do, that I'm proposing for emails. In other words, schedule time and schedule a limited time that you will look at it. I find that if I don't limit myself to say half an hour, the next thing I look, I've spent an hour or 2 hours enmeshed in social media. Planning tools are obviously important, and we've talked about the doing weekly and daily to-do list. Now this little infographic, which I pulled off the internet, will give you lots and lots of tips of how you can better focus your time. And you will see some of the things we've talked about, they cover. So again, look at this, reflect on this, see how you can apply it. There's some really good general personal effectiveness tips in this, but most of all, time management is about you creating the environment and creating the discipline and creating the time to manage your time. We've touched a bit on delegations as a method of getting rid of quadrant 2 activities. I guess the important, and again I'm drawing from Stephen Covey's work here, but if you're going to delegate, be cognizant of the fact that there's 2 types of delegations. Go for delegations where you just quickly get somebody to do something for you, do this, do that, is ineffective because the person is just going to revert back to you for further instruction. So what is suggested is the concept of stewardship delegation, where you develop to whomever you're delegating an upfront understanding and commitment around what are the desired results, what are the guidelines, in other words, what restrictions apply to them taking on a task on your behalf, what resources can they draw on, what are the accountability parameters, in other words, how will we evaluate if it's been done effectively, and what are the consequences if people drop the ball or if they do a spectacular job. But if you've got somebody you can delegate to, embrace this approach, because the better you develop that person's understanding around stewardship delegation, the more they will function autonomously and more of your time will be freed up by being able to delegate. Right, so again, here's a little activity you can do on your own. Pause the video for a moment and make a list of your daily tasks that you could delegate and whom you could delegate it to. And then, as important, is look at the list of tasks that you believe cannot be delegated and objectively ask yourself why it cannot be delegated. If it is of a highly technical nature that's aligned with the responsibilities of your job, obviously you have to do your job. But often again, in my interaction with senior executives, I find that some of them hang on to activities that can easily be done by people lower in the organizational hierarchy, either because of an unwillingness to delegate or sometimes just because they haven't thought about it. It's something they've always done and they've kept on doing it. So relook your tasks and activities. Remember what I suggested, that you plot it against these 4 quadrants, look at them and decide which should go into that quadrant where you can delegate. So this brings us to the end of our time management session. And I have to thank you for your time, because if you've taken the 20 minutes to watch this video, you've given me and you've used one of the most precious commodities that is at your disposal. I hope that you will apply these principles, and I hope that you will see the same incredible change in your available time that I saw and achieved through time management. Thank you.